My name's Dr. Emily Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I wasn't always Dr. Carter, though. There was a time when I was just a terrified medical intern, standing in a cold, sterile operating room with trembling hands and a heart full of ambition. Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. I always love knowing how far stories like mine travel. And if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or humiliated by someone in power, you might just want to stick around till the end and rate this story when it's over because trust me, it's one you won't forget. I still remember the day I was kicked out of that operating room. The man responsible was Dr. Richard Vaughn, a man every young surgeon in training wanted to impress, brilliant, respected, and absolutely ruthless. He was the kind of surgeon who could perform miracles with his hands, but destroy careers with his words. To the hospital board, he was a hero. To those of us beneath him, he was a storm, unpredictable, cold, and always watching for weakness. I had been assigned to assist him in a complicated cardiac bypass, my first major surgery observation. My hands shook slightly as I held the retractor, but I was steady, focused, until the moment I corrected his mistake, softly, respectfully, but still, in his eyes, unforgivable. He froze mid-procedure, his eyes narrowing above the mask. "Did you just correct me, Dr. Carter?" The air in the room turned heavy. I felt every nurse and resident stop breathing. I tried to explain, "Sir, I only meant that the vessel might." But he cut me off, his tone sharp enough to slice through bone.
Out.
"Get out of my or." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The humiliation burned deep. I could still hear the beeping monitors echoing behind me as I backed out of the room, the doors swinging shut on what I thought was the end of my medical dream. The rumors spread like wildfire. The intern who corrected Vaughn. People whispered. Supervisors avoided me. Even my best friend in residency, Clara, told me quietly, "You don't cross him, Em." No one does. I spent nights crying into my notes, wondering if I'd thrown away years of hard work with one moment of honesty. But somewhere inside that despair, something ignited. A promise. I would never let another man humiliate me into silence again. If I had to crawl my way to the top, if I had to outwork every arrogant surgeon in that hospital, I would. And someday, I'd walk back into that same operating room. Not as a trembling intern, but as the woman in charge. That night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror of the on-call room. My eyes were swollen, red. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something new, defiance. "They'll remember my name," I whispered. Not because I gave up, but because I didn't. The weeks after that humiliation felt endless. Every hallway in the hospital seemed to whisper his name. Every time I scrubbed in, I could feel people's eyes on me, as if I carried a mark of failure stitched into my scrubs. I threw myself into the one thing that never judged me: work. I stayed up through nights studying anatomy diagrams, replaying surgical procedures frame by frame in my head until I could visualize every cut, every suture, every clamp in perfect sequence. Sleep became optional. Coffee became survival. My friends started to drift away, warning me that my obsession would burn me out. But obsession was all I had left, Doctor. Vaughn, meanwhile, continued to rise, smiling in board meetings, praised by patients, and teaching new interns who looked at him the same way I once did. Every time I passed him in the corridor, he'd glance at me like I was invisible. And somehow, that stung more than the day he yelled at me. He'd erased me, and I couldn't stand it. I wanted him to see me, not as a mistake, not as the intern who overstepped, but as the doctor who would one day stand shoulder to shoulder with him, or higher. Years passed in a blur of sleepless nights, endless rotations, and constant reminders that medicine isn't just about saving lives. It's about politics, hierarchy, and ego. But every insult, every setback, every eye roll from a superior only sharpened my resolve. I began volunteering for the most brutal shifts, trauma nights, emergency calls, post-op monitoring. Slowly, the senior staff began to notice. "Carter doesn't break," I overheard one of them say once. "She works like she's got something to prove." They were right. When my residency ended, I applied for a surgical fellowship, one of the most competitive in the country. Vaughn was on the selection board. When I walked into the interview room and saw him sitting there, arms crossed, that same cold smirk playing on his lips, I nearly lost my composure. But then I remembered what I promised myself in that mirror years ago. They'll remember my name. So I smiled, shook his hand, and answered every question with calm precision. When the results came out, I was accepted. And I knew, in that moment, that the tables had just started to turn. But revenge doesn't come fast in my world. It brews quietly, like a slow infection. During my fellowship, I focused not on humiliating him, but on becoming better, sharper, faster, smarter. I started publishing papers, leading complex procedures, earning the kind of respect that couldn't be faked or bought. Nurses began asking me for advice. Younger doctors shadowed me. And yet, whenever I caught a glimpse of Vaughn in the hallway, I felt that old burn in my chest. Because even though I was becoming someone new, he still looked at me like I was a ghost from his past. A reminder of something beneath him. One evening, while performing a delicate aortic repair, a senior consultant whispered, "Vaughn's slowing down. He's not the legend he used to be." I didn't respond, but inside, I felt something shift, like destiny quietly turning a page. The man who once destroyed my confidence was beginning to fade. And I was still rising to be. By the end of that year, I'd received an offer from another hospital, a promotion that came with a title, Chief Surgeon of Cardiothoracic Medicine. I remember staring at the letter in my hand, the ink still fresh, and realizing what it meant. The same woman who had been thrown out of an, or was now being handed the keys to one. But what I didn't know, not yet, was that life had a cruel, poetic way of completing its circle. Because one day, not long after I took that new position, a familiar name appeared on the patient intake list: Dr. Richard Vaughn, myocardial infarction, heart attack, and he was requesting emergency surgery. The moment I saw his name on the surgical roster, my hands froze. I was standing in my new office, when the nurse brought in the file. The same name I had spent years trying to rise above was now written in shaky ink across a chart that reeked of irony. Dr. Richard Vaughn, age 56. Chief complaint, acute myocardial infarction. Status, critical. Transfer recommended for emergency bypass. Surgeon assigned, Dr. Emily Carter. I stared at those words, unable to decide whether it was fate, karma, or some cosmic joke. For a long moment, I didn't move. Memories rushed through me like flash burns. The humiliation, the shouting, the way his voice had cut through my soul that night in the operating room. "Get out. You don't belong here." The words that had haunted me through every sleepless night. And now, here we were. He was the one on the table, and I was the one with the scalpel. "Doctor?" the nurse asked softly, breaking my trance. "Should I confirm the case?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said. "Prep the team. He's mine." When they wheeled him in, I almost didn't recognize him. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by a frail man clutching his chest, his skin pale, sweat glistening across his temples. The arrogance that once defined him had vanished. All that remained was fear. For a brief, fleeting moment, I saw not the man who'd humiliated me, but a human being hanging by a thread. The anger I had carried for years began to clash with the oath I had sworn as a doctor. "Do no harm." He looked up at me as they adjusted his oxygen mask, his eyes glassy, but sharp enough to recognize my face. The flicker of surprise, maybe even shame, was unmistakable. His lips parted, trembling. "Carter," he rasped. "You, chief surgeon." "Yes, Dr. Vaughn," I said evenly, adjusting the monitors. "And you're my operating room now." His eyes widened, a tear forming at the edge. Not from pain, but from something heavier. Regret, maybe. Or the realization that power doesn't last forever. The surgery began moments later. My hands were steady, my mind locked in that razor-sharp zone where nothing else exists. Every move, every cut, every suture was precise. My assistants followed my lead, my voice the only sound guiding the chaos of the room. Hours passed. There were moments when his vitals dropped, when his heart nearly gave up, and every instinct in me screamed that I could end it, that I could let fate handle what he'd once tried to ruin. But I didn't, because this was my revenge, not by taking his life, but by saving it. Showing him that the girl he threw out of the ore had become the woman who could keep him alive. When the final suture was tied and the monitors stabilized, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. The nurse said quietly, "Vitals normal. He's stable." I stepped back, peeled off my gloves, and stared down at him. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was closure. Hours later, in the recovery ward, I visited him. He was awake, frail, but conscious. His eyes followed me as I walked in. "You saved me," he whispered. "I did," I said calmly. "Because that's what doctors do." He nodded weakly. "I was wrong about you," he admitted, voice trembling. "I let my pride ruin good people." I didn't respond. I just looked at him, the man who once defined my limits, now staring at me like I was the only reason he was alive. After a long silence, I said, "Sometimes it takes losing control to understand what real strength looks like." He tried to smile, but the weight of his past hung heavy in the air. I turned to leave, my footsteps echoing down the quiet hallway. For the first time since that night years ago, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. But as fate would have it, that wasn't the end of our story. Because a few weeks later, when the hospital board gathered to elect a new medical director, the highest position in the entire system, my name was at the top of the list. And sitting quietly in the back row, recovering but watching, was Dr. Vaughn. The same man who once threw me out of a surgery room now stood and applauded as I took the stage. When I walked into the hospital as chief surgeon for the first time, it felt unreal. My name, Dr. Evelyn Hart, was printed in bold letters on the frosted glass door of my new office. The same hospital that had once tossed me out of the surgery room now handed me the keys to its most prestigious department. I sat down in the leather chair, ran my fingers across the mahogany desk, and let out a deep, steady breath. I remembered every insult, every humiliation, every time Dr. Mitchell made me feel like I didn't belong. The memories came flooding back, not with sadness, but with power. The nurses who had once ignored me now stood at attention when I passed. The interns who had whispered behind my back now scrambled to impress me. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I had built my name brick by brick, surgery by surgery, sleepless night by sleepless night. And now, I finally had the authority to make things right. A week later, I was reviewing surgical applications for a new trauma consultant position. The HR had knocked softly before entering and handed me a folder. "Dr. Mitchell Harrison, he's applied for the role," she said. For a second, I froze. The name felt like a ghost brushing past me. "Mitchell Harrison?" I repeated, my voice steady, but my heartbeat erratic. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "He's been through a rough time. Lost his last hospital position due to some conduct issues." I smiled faintly. Karma, I thought. But I kept my expression neutral. "Set up an interview," I said calmly, even though my hands trembled slightly. I didn't want revenge to control me, but I wanted him to see who I had become. I wanted him to face what he tried to destroy. When he entered my office 2 days later, I didn't recognize him at first. His hair had grayed at the temples, and his confident stride was replaced with something uncertain, almost timid. He looked down at my nameplate, and when his eyes lifted to meet mine, the color drained from his face. "Dr. Hart," he said softly. I nodded, my lips curving into a polite smile. "Dr. Harrison," I greeted. "Please have a seat." The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. He fumbled with his resume, his hands slightly shaking. I flipped through the pages, pretending to read, but I already knew this was more than an interview. It was a reckoning. "You've had quite a career," I said evenly. "Though I see there were some disciplinary notes." His jaw tightened and he nodded. "Yes." "A misunderstanding," he said quietly. "I see," I replied, then leaned forward. "You once told me I wasn't cut out for surgery, remember?" His eyes flickered with shame. I was wrong, he whispered. I could have rejected him then. I could have taken satisfaction in making him beg for a job, the same way he made me beg for a chance. But as I watched him, the man who once towered over me, now looking small and defeated, I felt something unexpected.
Pity.
Dr. Harrison, I said finally, closing the file. The hospital is short-staffed. You'll start under probation. 3 months. I expect professionalism and respect from you at all times. His eyes widened in disbelief. You're giving me a chance? He asked. Yes, I said softly. Everyone deserves one. He stood slowly, his voice trembling. Thank you, he said, avoiding my gaze. As he left, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Revenge didn't feel like I imagined it would. It wasn't fiery or triumphant. It was quiet, controlled, almost peaceful. But deep inside, I knew the real victory wasn't making him kneel. It was proving I never needed his validation to begin with. Over the next few weeks, working with Dr. Harrison was like looking into a mirror of the past. He was respectful, quiet, sometimes distant. I saw in him the man who once believed he was untouchable, now humbled by his own choices. He avoided unnecessary conversation, but one evening after a long surgery, as we stood washing our hands at the scrub sink, he finally spoke. You're one of the best surgeons I've ever seen, he said quietly. I glanced at him, unsure how to respond.
Funny, I said.
You didn't think so years ago. He smiled faintly. I know. I was arrogant. I let my ego ruin things that should have been beautiful.
I'm sorry, Evelyn.
Hearing him say my name, not Hart, not intern, but Evelyn, it felt like closure. I didn't forgive him instantly, but in that moment, I realized something profound. I had already moved past needing his apology. My success, my strength, my peace, they weren't born from revenge. They were born from perseverance. That night, when I returned home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, overlooking the city lights. My journey had been brutal, but every scar, every tear, every sleepless night had led me here, to this quiet sense of victory. I thought of the girl who had been kicked out of the surgery room, humiliated and broken, and I wished I could tell her, hold on, Evelyn. One day, they'll know your name.
And now they did.
The days that followed became a testament to what true resilience and determination could achieve. I walked through the hospital corridors with a quiet confidence that no one could ignore. Nurses, interns, and even patients looked at me differently, not because of my title, but because of the aura of someone who had fought her way through every obstacle and emerged stronger. Dr. Harrison adjusted to his probation period with the utmost care, and I watched him closely. It was almost therapeutic, observing someone who once made me feel small now treading carefully under my supervision. I never gloatingly reminded him of the past, but his awareness of it was palpable. Sometimes, when he glanced at me during surgery, there was a flicker of recognition, the understanding that the woman in front of him was not only his superior professionally, but had also mastered herself emotionally. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I knew it was there, and I smiled inwardly at the justice in that silence. I also noticed the respect from other colleagues change, a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. They admired the way I handled every challenge, the calm decisiveness, the balance between authority and empathy. Every decision I made, every patient I saved, every life that I influenced reinforced the story of a woman who refused to be defined by humiliation, rejection, or condescension. Dr. Harrison's presence became almost symbolic, a reminder that some people attempt to diminish us, only to witness our ascent. I sometimes caught him watching me during consultations, his expression unreadable but filled with humility. And while I didn't seek revenge in a traditional sense, I realized that true revenge isn't about breaking someone down. It's about rising so high that your past oppressors see the strength they once underestimated. On a particularly busy night, I stayed late, performing a critical surgery with a team of interns and residents. Dr. Harrison was assisting under my direction, and I could feel the weight of the past hanging subtly in the sterile air of the operating room. Yet, As the procedure concluded successfully, the relief and gratitude in the eyes of the patient's family mirrored my own inner sense of triumph. This was not about ego or personal satisfaction. It was about mastery, skill, and living the life I had fought for. Every challenge I faced earlier, every dismissal, every doubt, had been training for this very moment. And in this moment, there was no room for bitterness, only fulfillment. That evening, after the shift, I returned to my office, letting the quiet hum of the hospital soothe my mind. I pulled out a notebook and wrote a letter to my younger self, the young intern who had been kicked out of the surgery room years ago. I wrote, "Hold on to your passion. Keep your focus. Let your strength define you, not the opinions of others. One day, they'll see who you truly are." I paused, reflecting on the irony that Dr. Harrison, the man who once tried to stifle my growth, was now a small chapter in the story of my success. The universe, I realized, had a way of balancing itself, giving each struggle its weight and each victory its satisfaction. And the beauty of it all was that I had arrived at this point not through spite, but through perseverance, integrity, and unwavering dedication to my craft. As I look back at every moment of humiliation, rejection, and doubt, I understand that true triumph lies not in making someone else feel small, but in becoming so strong that their opinions no longer matter. Dr. Harrison's apology, his cautious demeanor, and his recognition of my abilities were simply echoes of the respect I had earned through my journey. I hope you, the viewer, take away something from this story: the strength to overcome, the courage to rise, and the understanding that the path to success often involves turning pain into motivation. I want to ask you again, where are you watching from tonight? How would you rate this story on a scale from 1 to 10? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more real-life revenge, triumph, and emotional stories told from women's perspectives. This is Evelyn Hart, and thank you for letting me share my journey with you.